The silence that followed Kale's statement was heavy. The gentle hum of the station's life support and the distant clatter from the cafe's kitchen seemed to grow louder. Jean and Mira exchanged a glance. They had learned about the soul incursion in history modules, of course. It was a brief, confusing conflict, now often framed as a diplomatic misunderstanding. To meet someone who had been there on the other side was unthinkable. Jean leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You do not have to speak of it, sir. We did not mean to bring up pain." Kale looked at his drink, a sharp-smelling blue liquor. He swirled it in his glass, his 3 remaining long fingers moving with a slight tremor.
"No."
"You offered a drink, a kindness. It has been a long time since one of your kind offered me a kindness without a datapad first." He took a slow sip. "And you should know. Someone should really know." He set the glass down carefully. "My people, the Concordance, we are old. We have had faster-than-light travel for many of your centuries. We saw your first shaky jumps, the primitive warp bubbles from your soul system. To us, it was like watching a child find a plasma torch in a wooden house. You were not ready. You were divided. Many nations, many tribes on your one world, all squabbling. We saw the potential for chaos." Mira, ever practical, frowned slightly. "So it was an intervention?" "A police action," Kale corrected, his large, dark eyes fixed on a point in the past. "A humanitarian one. Our mission was to stabilize the system, to pacify the outer colonies first, where governance was weakest, and then encourage a unified, peaceful Earth under Concordance guidance. We would share technology, bring order. It was for the greater galactic good." His voice was flat, reciting a doctrine he no longer believed. "My unit, the 7th Talon, was among the first. We were given the moon you call Europa. A small science and mining outpost was there. The intelligence report said maybe 50, 60 humans. Civilian scientists, a few security personnel. It was to be a simple show of force, a peaceful takeover of a strategic location. We would cut their communication to Earth, and they would see the futility of resistance." A low, grating sound escaped him, something like a sigh. "We were so confident. Our ships were superior. Our energy weapons could pierce any armor they had. Our soldiers were trained for 100 different environments. We dropped from orbit in our landing shuttles, a perfect formation. The outpost was a series of domes and low structures on the surface under the ice. It was quiet, no defensive fire. We thought they were hiding, or already surrendering." He looked up at Jean and Mira. "Do you know what our first real enemy was? It was not your soldiers. It was your world." Kale described the disembarkation. The surface of Europa was a nightmare of cold and radiation. But the real mission was below. The human outpost was primarily under the ice, in the ocean, for access to liquid water and geothermal vents. The Concordance force had to enter through a surface airlock and descend through a long, pressurized tube into the main habitat. "The cold," Kale said, his voice dropping. "It was a different kind of cold. It seeped through our thermal suits. Our technology is excellent, but it is made for normal space. Not for a place where the sky is ice and the sea is poison under crushing pressure. The light was wrong. Everything was blue and gray from the external lights on the structures. And the darkness between the lights was not empty. It felt thick. They reached the main habitation level. It was a large, vaulted space under a reinforced dome, with buildings inside it like a small town. It was empty, completely empty.
No man's.
No signs of struggle. Just the eerie, constant groan of ice and the hiss of life support. We spread out. My squad was tasked with securing the central command module. We moved in standard formation, but the silence, it was not peaceful. It was a waiting silence. Every shadow from the fabricated structures was too long. Every sound our own boots made seemed too loud, like we were shouting our position. He took another drink. Our commander, veteran First Talon, tried to contact the humans on all frequencies. He offered peace, safety, the benefits of the Concordance. Only static replied. Then a human voice did come on the general channel. It was a young voice, female, calm. She said only one sentence before the channel cut again. Kale's mimicry of the human voice was toneless, but the words were clear. She said, "Welcome to the dark. Mind your step." Jean felt a chill. Myra's skeptical expression had faded into one of intense focus. "We thought it was a joke, a weak attempt at threat. We did not understand." Kale's hand tightened on his glass. Minutes later, the main power to the entire complex failed. All at once. Not a fade. A cut. Our helmet lights and weapon lights came on automatically. But you must understand, human light is different from ours. Our infrared and low-light vision was confused by the reflections off the ice and metal. We were in a small canyon between two habitat buildings. And then the emergency lights on the human buildings flickered on. Red ones. Pulsing. He looked at them, and for the first time, real emotion flickered in his dark eyes. It was fear. They did not light the area. They only made the shadows worse. They turned the world into a room of blood and blackness. Flashing. And in that flashing dark, we heard the first sound that was not us. It was a scrape, then a breath, loud and ragged, right next to my ear. But my squadmate on that side was 2 meters away. He heard it too. We turned. There was nothing there. Just a flashing red shadow. Kale fell silent for a long moment, lost in the memory of that first, terrifying scrape in the dark. The safe, warm cafe around them felt very far away. The red light pulsed. With each flash, the world jumped. One moment, Kale saw the tense face of his squadmate, Hyrule. The next moment, only the afterimage burned in the darkness. The scrape came again, closer now. It was the sound of something hard dragging across the rough, ice-coated floor. "Form up!" Veteran First Talon's voice crackled in their helmet comms. It was tight with controlled fear. Back-to-back circle. They tried. They were well-trained. But the flashing light and the crushing darkness between flashes made it impossible. Kale stumbled against another soldier. They both hissed in alarm, swinging their weapons around before recognizing each other. Then came the scream that it was not a human sound. It was the high, piercing shriek of a concordant soldier in absolute terror. It cut through the comms and then was abruptly silenced. The squad marker for Phonic, their point soldier, blinked from green to a solid gray on Kale's helmet display. Gone. "Phonic, report position." The veteran first shouted. Silence. Only the heavy breathing of the remaining soldiers filled the comms. "Movement. Left side." Someone yelled. A stream of brilliant blue plasma lit up the flashing red gloom. It hit nothing, scorching the wall of a habitat building. The shadow it cast was huge and monstrous for a split second. A new sound started. A low, rhythmic thumping. It was slow and deep, vibrating through the deck plates. Thump, thump, thump. It was not a machine. Felt organic. Alive. "What is that?" Hyrule whispered. "Is that a heart?" The thought was more terrifying than the dark. Was it a human heart? Could they be that strong? That loud? Another scream. This one was shorter, ending in a wet gurgle. Another squad marker went gray. No one had seen anything.
No enemy silhouette.
No muzzle flash from a human weapon. Just the red pulse, the darkness, the scraping, the thumping, and then death. Panic began to rise. It was a cold vine wrapping around Kale's mind. This was not war. This was a slaughter in a nightmare. They were blind and deaf in an environment that felt actively hostile. To the open square. "Now, move!" The veteran first ordered, his voice breaking. They ran. They stumbled over unseen cables and debris. The thumping sound seemed to follow them, keeping pace. Kale's helmet display was a mess of confused sensor data. The cold ocean outside the dome, the metal structures, the residual heat from their own weapons. It all blurred together into meaningless noise. Human technology was simple, but their use of the environment was a form of genius he now understood was deadly. They burst out of the canyon between the buildings into a wider, open area under the main dome. Here, the red emergency lights were fewer. It was darker. The only light came from the distant, faint glow of bioluminescent organisms in the observation ports that showed the ocean outside. The water was a black wall speckled with eerie, drifting green and blue dots. For a moment, they stopped, gasping. They were down to 8. They had lost 4 soldiers without ever seeing a foe. Sensors are useless, someone panted. Their suits. They must have some non-reflective coating. Or they are using the cold spots. Then Kale saw it, or he thought he did. A shape, darker than the surrounding black, moved against one of the observation ports. It blotted out the glowing dots for just a second. It was tall, humanoid, but it moved wrong. It was a loping, uneven movement. It did not seem to care about silence. "There!" he shouted, firing his plasma rifle. The bolt screamed across the open space and exploded against the reinforced transparent steel of the port. The light illuminated the area for one brilliant, terrifying second. In that second, Kale saw them. Not an army. 3 human figures. They were not hiding. They were standing near the port, watching. They wore bulky, black environment suits. Their helmets were blank, dark visors. One of them was leaning heavily against the port, one leg bent at a wrong angle. The other 2 stood in front of it, like a shield. They did not flinch from the explosion. They just stood there. In the dying light of the plasma blast, the one in the middle, the one protecting the wounded, slowly raised an arm. It was not a weapon. The human just pointed. A single, gloved finger aimed directly at Kale's group. Then the light was gone. The afterimage burned. But the message was clear. "We see you. Open fire. All directions." The veteran first screamed. His composure shattered. A storm of blue plasma lit the dome. It was wild, undisciplined. They fired at shadows, at port windows, at pipes on the ceiling. The noise was deafening. The heat from their weapons fogged their visors, and through it all, the slow, deep thump, thump, thump continued, steady as a drum. When the soldiers stopped to reload, breathing in ragged sobs, the silence rushed back in. The red lights still flashed. The thumping stopped. Kale's audio sensors picked up a new sound. A human voice. It was not on the comms. It was being spoken inside a helmet, picked up faintly by the external microphones. It was the same young, calm, female voice from the speaker. She was humming. It was a simple, repeating tune. It was not aggressive. It sounded almost like a lullaby or a work song. In the middle of this carnage, a human was humming a gentle tune. To Kale, that was the most terrifying moment yet. The screams, the dark, the invisible deaths, those were the acts of monsters. But this calm, almost bored hum in the face of their panic, this was something else. This spoke of a mind so far from his own understanding that it froze his blood more than the Europan cold. The veteran first made a decision. "We cannot stay here. We are targets. We fall back to the surface access tube. We will hold that choke point." It was a good tactic. In any normal battle, it would have been the right move. They turned and ran back toward the narrow passage they had come from. The canyon between the buildings. They did not see the wounded human, left behind by the port, slowly raise a hand to its helmet. They did not see it tap a control. They did not hear the soft, calm words it spoke into its own mic. They were too busy running from the dark and the hum, back toward the place they thought was safe. The retreat was not a disciplined maneuver. It was a frantic scramble back through the canyon of flashing red shadows. Every pipe that dripped made them jump. Every groan of the ice seemed like a footstep behind them. The humming had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. They reached the base of the access tube that led back to the surface. It was a tall, cylindrical shaft with a ladder running up its center. At the bottom was a small staging area. The veteran first positioned 2 soldiers to watch the dark opening they had just come from. The rest aimed their weapons up the tube into the gloom. The plan was simple: climb to the surface one by one while the others covered them. The tube was a perfect defensive position. Nothing could approach without being seen. Kale felt a sliver of hope. The nightmare of the open dome was behind them. Here there was order, a clear line of fire, logic. Veteran First Talone gestured to Hyrule. "You first. Get to the top and secure the airlock. Report." Hero holstered his rifle and began to climb the metal rungs, his movements quick and sure. The sound of his boots on the ladder echoed in the tube. Kale watched him grow smaller, a shape against the faint light from the surface airlock far above. He was about halfway up when the lights in the tube changed. The dim work lights flickered and brightened to a harsh, white intensity. At the same time, a loud, cheerful human voice boomed from hidden speakers. It was so sudden and so loud that Kale almost fired his weapon. "Attention," the voice said, in perfectly translated concordance language. It was friendly, like a teacher addressing a class. "Please ensure your safety harness is securely fastened. Keep all limbs inside the ride at all times." The soldiers stared at each other in confusion. What was a safety harness? What ride? Then the vibration started. A deep, mechanical hum that shook the entire tube. Hero stopped climbing, clinging to the ladder. From above, a distant grinding noise grew rapidly louder. Kale looked up. Something was coming down the tube. Not from below, from above. It was a massive, cylindrical weight like a piston. It filled the entire diameter of the tube, descending with terrifying speed. It was a maintenance counterweight, part of the station's machinery, now turned into a weapon. Hero had nowhere to go. He looked down, his face a mask of terror in the bright light. He could not outclimb it. He could not jump. "Jump!" Kale screamed. Hero let go. He fell, a tumbling figure, past the rest of them. They heard the sickening crunch as he hit the deck plates at the bottom of the staging area. His squad marker flashed gray. The giant piston slammed to a halt just a few meters above their heads, sealing the tube completely. The way to the surface was now blocked by 10 meters of solid metal. The cheerful voice spoke again. "Thank you for your cooperation. Please proceed to the green dome for extraction." The speakers clicked off. The bright lights remained. They were trapped. The dark canyon behind them, and a solid metal wall above them. The stage was now brutally, perfectly lit. The veteran first was making a low, desperate sound. Their perfect choke point had become a perfect tomb. It was then that the humans finally appeared. They did not creep from the shadows. They walked. From the same dark opening they had just fled, the three figures emerged. Two walking, one being half-carried between them. They stopped at the edge of the lit staging area, just outside the ring of their weapons. The humans stood there, looking at them. Their suits were scarred and dusty. The one in the middle, the wounded one, hung between his comrades. His leg was clearly broken, the suit's material rigid around the knee. The one on his left, whose helmet had a small, faded symbol that looked like a flower, held him up. The one on the right, with a long scratch down the chest plate, kept a hand on a weapon at their side. For a long moment no one moved. No one fired. The Concordant soldiers were frozen, weapons trained on the three still figures. The wounded human moved. With a pained, slow motion, he lifted his hand and touched the side of his helmet. A hiss of air, and he unlocked it. He twisted it and pulled it off. Kale flinched, expecting an attack. But the human just dropped the helmet, clattered on the floor. The face revealed was young, male. His skin was pale, beaded with sweat from pain. His black hair was plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard, his breath making clouds in the freezing air. He must have been in agony, but his face was calm. Exhausted, but calm. He looked directly at Veteran First Talon. He coughed, a wet sound, and spoke. His voice was raw but clear. The translator in Kale's helmet worked, turning the words into something he could understand. "My name," the human said, each word an effort, "is Lieutenant Park." He paused, swallowing. "You are in my command post. You have hurt my people." He glanced toward the dark dome where his friends had vanished. "This is over. You need to lay down your weapons." The veteran first found his voice. It was full of disbelief and anger. "You are one wounded soldier. We are 7. You will surrender." Lieutenant Park almost smiled. It was a thin, pain thing. He looked at the soldier holding him up, the one with the flower on her helmet. "Kim," he said softly. "How long?" The human female, Kim, answered without looking away from the aliens. 4 minutes, sir. Evac is 4 minutes out. Shuttle just cleared the ridge. Park looked back at the veteran first. You hear that? I have a shuttle coming. You have 4 minutes to decide to live. The veteran first raised his rifle. You are bluffing. You called no shuttle. We monitor all channels. Park's pained smile returned. You monitor your channels. You don't know our songs. He closed his eyes for a second, gathering strength. When he opened them, his gaze was steady. He was not looking at the veteran first anymore. He was looking past him at something only he could see. He spoke again, his voice suddenly stronger, clearer, full of a formal tone. Lieutenant Park to all points, he said, as if giving a daily report. I have a party of 12. In the Green Dome. He gave the exact coordinates of their position. Light it up. Then his strength left him. He sagged between his comrades. Kim and the other soldier, Lee, tightened their grip on him. Diane Kale's helmet. The translation finished. For a second, the words meant nothing. Light it up. Party. It sounded like a request for illumination. For lights. Then the veteran first understood. His body went rigid. He was not from a species that wept, but his face crumpled into an expression of pure, helpless horror. He was not looking at a bluff. He was looking at a man who had just ordered his own death to ensure theirs. He was looking at a math that made no sense, a value system that traded one life for 12 without a second thought. The universe held its breath. Time seemed to stop and stretch thin. The brightly lit staging area was a frozen picture. On one side, 7 alien soldiers, weapons raised, their commander's face a mask of dawning horror. On the other, 3 humans, one limp between his friends, who held him with a fierce, gentle firmness. Kale's mind could not process the order. Light it up. It was an idiom his translator had fumbled with. It suggested celebration, illumination, but the tone, the calm, the coordinates. A cold, sick feeling began in his stomach. The veteran first broke the silence. His voice was a shrill, desperate scrape. He is lying. It is a trick. No one calls death on themselves. But his eyes were darting, looking at the metal ceiling, at the dome above them, as if he could see through it to the cold blackness of space. The human shuttle was 4 minutes away. What else was 4 minutes away? Lieutenant Park did not argue. He was beyond that. His head lolled forward for a moment. Then he forced it up. He looked past the aliens, his eyes unfocused. He was speaking again, but not to them. His voice was weaker, just a murmur the external microphones barely caught. The kids, he breathed out. Tell me. The kids got out. The human soldier named Kim, the one with the flower on her helmet, shifted her grip on him. Her voice, when it came through Kale's speakers, was surprisingly soft. All the civvies, sir. The science team. The teachers. All of them. Evacuated hours ago. Shuttles long gone. They're safe. A profound change came over Park's face. The lines of pain and tension did not vanish, but they were smoothed by something else. It was a deep, soul-deep relief. It was the look of a man who had completed his only real task. Good, he whispered. The word was a sigh, a final release. That's good. Then a violent shudder racked his body. A cough tore from his throat, and this time, a fine spray of red dotted the inside of his visor, still hanging from his suit's neck ring. His broken leg gave way completely. Only the firm hold of Kim and Lee kept him from collapsing. Kale watched, his weapon forgotten in his hands. This was not a warrior's end. This was not a heroic last stand. This was a slow, messy, human end in a freezing pit. The lieutenant was drowning in his own blood, his body broken. The grand sacrifice he had just made was crumbling into simple, ugly biology. The veteran first seemed to draw strength from this weakness. See, he dies. He is nothing. Hold position. But his order lacked conviction. His eyes kept flicking upward. Park's eyes were closed. His breathing was a horrible, wet rasp. Each breath was a fight he was losing. Then the other human, Lee, moved. He carefully lowered Park to sit against the wall of the staging area, propping him up. Kim kept a hand on the lieutenant's shoulder. Lee then did something that would burn itself into Kale's memory forever. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not shout an insult or make a final defiant gesture. He knelt in front of his dying commander. He opened a small pouch on his own suit's belt. From it, he took a simple, pre-filled medical injector. A hypospray. He held it up where Park could see it, if his eyes were open. "Sir," Lee said, his voice firm and clear, devoid of the softness Kim had used. It was the voice of a medic stating a fact. "You're not making the shuttle. The pressure's building in your chest. You've got minutes. They won't be quiet." Park's eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain, but they focused on the hypospray in Lee's glove. He understood. There was no fear in his gaze, only a question. Lee gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "It's done, sir. The civvies are clear. The message is sent." We held the line. Park's eyes moved from the hypospray to Lee's helmet visor, then to Kim's. He was looking for something. Agreement? Absolution? He found it. His lips moved, forming silent words the microphones didn't catch. Then he gave one slow, shallow nod. Lee did not hesitate. He did not offer a long goodbye. He leaned forward and pressed the hypospray against the side of Park's neck, right over the main artery. There was a soft hiss. The effect was immediate. The terrible, ragged struggle in Park's chest eased. The lines of agony on his face softened, then melted away. His body, which had been rigid with suffering, went limp against the wall. His head tilted to the side, as if falling into a deep sleep. His eyes stayed open, but they saw nothing. The life left them as gently as a sigh. Lee stayed kneeling for a second. He reached out and, with a tenderness that was shocking, closed Park's eyelids with his gloved fingers. "See you on the other side, sir," Lee said quietly. Then he stood up. He turned, not toward his fallen friend, but to face the Concordant soldiers again. He and Kim now stood side by side, two soldiers before their seated, peaceful commander. They said nothing. They made no move to attack. They simply waited. The silence was absolute. The bright lights hummed. The giant piston blocked the sky. Kale felt his own mind cracking. The plasma fire, the dark, the thumping, those were horrors. But this calm, compassionate, efficient mercy? This was an abyss. They had just watched a soldier kill his own commander. And it was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of supreme loyalty. It was the final, logical step of their insane code. They would die for a comrade, and they would kill a comrade to spare him pain. Both acts came from the same place. To Kale, this was more alien than anything in the galaxy. It was a moral universe turned inside out. The terror he felt now was not of death, but of understanding. He was staring at a logic he could never, ever share, wielded by people who looked fragile but were somehow harder than the ice of this moon. The veteran first made a choked sound. He was not looking at the humans anymore. He was staring at the ceiling, his whole body trembling. He was calculating the 4 minutes. They were almost up. He looked at his own soldiers, at their confused and terrified faces, then back at the 2 living humans who had just shown him a kindness more terrible than any cruelty. He lowered his weapon. The blue glow at its tip died. "Fall back," he whispered into the comms. "Into the dome. Find cover. Anything." It was not a surrender to the humans. It was a surrender to the math, to the storm he knew was coming from the sky they could not see. They turned and ran, not as soldiers, but as animals fleeing a fire, leaving the 3 humans alone in the light. Kale's words hung in the warm air of the cafe. The story was out. The memory, which had lived like a cold stone in his stomach for years, was now in the space between them. He felt empty, tired. Jean and Mira were silent. The cheerful sounds of the station around them, the clink of cups, the distant announcement of a docking clearance, felt like they were coming from another universe. They had just been shown a reflection of their own species in a broken mirror, held by a stranger. Mira was the first to speak. Her voice was quiet, practical, but it wavered slightly. Kim and Lee, the two soldiers, did they get away in the chaos? Kale took a slow breath. He nodded once. Yes, the humans confirmed it later during prisoner exchanges. The blast pattern, the debris, it was calculated. The kinetic rod was precise. It destroyed the target zone, but the shockwave and debris shower were directed away from the path they had planned. They used the confusion and the storm to retreat to another emergency hatch. They were picked up hours later. He looked at his missing limb. They were luckier than some. Gene stared at his own hands, wrapped around his cooling teacup. He was thinking of Lieutenant Park, a man whose face he would never know, whose voice he had only heard through an alien story, a man who shared his heritage. The weight of that was immense. He just said good? Gene asked, barely above a whisper. He did, Kale said. It was the last thing that mattered to him. Not the enemy in front of him. Not his own death. That the children, the teachers, the ones who could not fight were safe. That was good. That was enough. Kale pushed his empty glass away. That is what ended the war. Not our defeats. Not your victories. The Concordance High Command saw the battle reports. Not just from Europa, from other places too. They saw the same patterns. Humans throwing themselves on grenades to save a single wounded comrade. Humans playing music full of static to jam sensors while they fought. Humans using primitive chemical explosives to create avalanches or floods, changing the battlefield itself. You did not fight to take our things. You fought to make us leave. And you were willing to break everything, including yourselves, to do it. He looked at them, his large, dark eyes solemn. You are a young species. You think we are advanced because we have better star drives and cleaner energy. We are old. We are careful. We have forgotten how to be that committed. How to care about something more than our own future. To see that is terrifying. To fight it is meaningless. You cannot defeat a tide. You can only wait for it to go out. Kale slowly stood up. His body ached, the old injury from that day throbbing with the memory. So we made a treaty. We gave up our police action. In return, you agreed to traffic lanes, to some trade rules. You got to keep your messy, painful, wonderful selves, because the cost of taking them was a price we finally understood we could not pay. Jean stood up quickly. Sir, Kale, thank you for telling us. Mira nodded, her eyes bright. It is a hard story to carry. Thank you for sharing its weight. Kale regarded them, these two young humans, with their kindness and their listening ears. They were the result of Lieutenant Park's good. They were the safe children grown up. The circle was so vast it was dizzying. Do not thank me, Kale said, his voice soft. Just know, the galaxy looks at you and sees a strong, tough species. That is not what you are. That is just the shell. Inside, you are a collection of fragile, powerful loves. For your families, for your homes, for your stories, for each other. You will break the universe to protect a fragile thing. That is your power. That is your terror. Never forget which one is more important. He gave them a slight, respectful nod, a gesture from his own culture. Then he turned and walked away, moving slowly through the tables toward the exit. His silhouette, missing a limb, seemed both frail and immense. Jean and Mira sat back down. They did not speak for a long time. The story sat with them, a living thing. Finally, Mira stirred. We should go. The repair update will be coming in soon. Yeah, Jean said, but he didn't move. Mira looked at him. What is it? Jean frowned, thinking. Captain Song, the human officer he mentioned. She said they couldn't know why Lieutenant Park did it. Maybe for the civilians. Maybe to complete the mission. Maybe to give Kim and Lee a chance. He looked at Mira. But Kale knew. He figured out the why. Mira waited. He did it for all of it, Jean said, the realization solidifying. Not for one reason. For every reason. For the civilians, for the mission, for his friends. And maybe also so that 7 alien soldiers would live to tell a story about human mercy to 2 strangers in a cafe years later. So that the cost would be remembered. So it would mean something. Mira absorbed this. The idea was huge. It meant that the terror Kale spoke of was also a hope. A painful, devastating hope. They finished their drinks in silence, the weight of their inheritance upon them. They were not just mechanics and logistics officers. They were the good that Lieutenant Park had died for. They were the reason. And now, they also carried the memory of the cost. As they left the cafe to return to their ship, the station seemed different. The quiet hum of peaceful commerce, the mix of species, the lack of fear, it was not normal. It was a miracle bought with a specific terrible price on a moon of ice. It was fragile, and it was worth everything. They walked a little closer together, saying nothing, understanding everything. Kale's world dissolved into a blind, scrambling panic. He ran with the others, back into the flashing red maze of the dome. The veteran first was no longer leading. He was just another fleeing shape. The order and discipline of the Concordance 7th Talon was gone, shattered not by weapons, but by an idea. They did not get far. A sound began. It started as a deep, subtle vibration in the deck plates, a hum that was felt in the bones more than heard. It grew quickly. It became a shriek, a tearing noise that came from above. It was the sound of something moving impossibly fast, cutting through the thin atmosphere and ice of the Europan surface. Kale looked up. Through the reinforced transparent steel of the main dome ceiling, he saw a star. But it was moving. It grew brighter, fiercer, becoming a spear of fire descending from the blackness. It was not the shuttle. It was something else. The kinetic projectile struck. There was no explosion of light or plasma. The violence was more fundamental. The dome ceiling did not shatter. It vanished in a circle directly above the staging area they had just left. One moment it was there, a shield against the ocean's pressure. The next, it was gone, replaced by a raging column of white. Atmospheric containment failed. The air in the dome, all the warmth and breathable gas, rushed out into the sucking vacuum above with a roar that deafened Kale's sensors. He was thrown off his feet, tumbling across the floor toward the new hole in the world. He saw two of his squadmates, too close to the breach, pulled silently out into the freezing night and the crushing ocean beyond. Their markers winked out. He slammed into the base of a heavy mining drill, the impact knocking the breath from him. The roaring stopped as quickly as it started. The pressure equalized. The dome was now open to the surface, a howling blizzard of ice particles swirling in through the breach. The temperature plummeted instantly. Frost began to crawl across every surface with a sickening speed. Kale struggled to his knees. His suit alarm was flashing red, warning of the cold and the thin, toxic air. He looked back toward the staging area. The green dome Lieutenant Park had named IT was gone. The entire section where the tube had been, where the humans had stood, where Hyrule had fallen, was now a crater of twisted, smoking metal and shattered composite materials. The giant piston was a mangled wreck. The neat, human structures around it were shredded. A perfect, circular wound in the moon base. And the humans? There was no sign.
No bodies.
Nothing. They had been erased from the universe by their own people. A calculated sacrifice. A pinpoint strike from orbit. The veteran first crawled over to him, his suit scarred and frosted. Only 4 of them were left. Their communication was broken, but the veteran first's face behind his visor was easy to read. It was empty. The fight was gone. He had seen the math completed. 1 human life traded for a tactical objective and the terror of a Concordance unit. It was a balance sheet no Concordance commander would ever approve. They did not fight anymore. They huddled behind the mining equipment as the blizzard howled through the hole. They waited to die from the cold or for the next strike. But the next strike never came. Instead, after a long time, they heard a new sound. The grinding of heavy machinery, but controlled this time. Through the swirling ice, they saw shapes moving at the edge of the crater.
Humans.
More of them, in heavy, armored environment suits. They moved with purpose, not stealth. They carried tools and cutting equipment. They were not there to fight. They were there to clean up, to secure. The humans found them easily. The Concordance soldiers offered no resistance. They had no resistance left to give. The humans disarmed them, checked them for injuries with brisk, impersonal efficiency, and then escorted them not with violence but with a firm, detached control back to a waiting, heavily armored shuttle on the surface. They were prisoners, but it felt less like a capture and more like a collection. The humans did not gloat. They did not speak to them at all, except for short, necessary commands about where to step. On the shuttle, during the flight to a larger human ship, Kale sat in a daze. He replayed it all in his head. The dark, the hum, the mercy, the fire from the sky. It did not connect. It was a series of brutal, illogical acts. It was only later, in the bare but adequate holding cell on the human cruiser, that a thought began to form. A human officer, a woman with a tired face named Captain Song, had come to explain the terms of the ceasefire. She was direct, not cruel. She asked if they needed medical care. She offered water. As she was leaving, Kale, speaking for the first time since his capture, found his voice. It was a rasp. Why? Captain Song paused, her hand on the doorframe. Why what? The lieutenant, Kale said. He called the strike. On himself. Why? Song looked at him for a long moment. She seemed to be deciding something. To save the civilians who were already gone, she said simply. To complete the mission. To protect the people next to him. She shrugged, a very human gesture of weary acceptance. Maybe so Kim and Lee would have a chance to slip away in the chaos before the blast. We won't know. He made a call. He killed himself, Kale stated, trying to make the equation clear. He ended his mission, Song corrected, her voice firm. There's a difference. Then she left. That was the moment the true terror settled into Kale's bones, colder than Europa's ocean. It wasn't their ferocity. It was their context. The Concordants fought for orders, for strategy, for the greater galactic good. These humans fought for ghosts, for children they had never met, for a friend's moment of peace, for an idea called the line that they would hold. They used tools not just as weapons but as messages. The dark was a tool. The maintenance piston was a tool. Mercy was a tool. You could beat a soldier. You could outthink a tactic. But how do you fight against a biosphere of sentient, historical pain that happened to invent guns? How do you calculate against people who measure victory in seconds bought for others and die with a word like good on their lips? Sitting in the quiet cafe years later, Kale looked at Jean and Mira. Their faces were young, open, full of a life that had never known that kind of choice. They came from the same species as Lieutenant Park and Medic Lee. You see, Kale said, his voice rough from the long story, the galaxy thinks the terror is your violence, your toughness. That is just the noise. The real terror is the why. You fight for invisible things, for memories, for futures you won't see. You can be a demon and a saint in the same minute, and you do not even feel the contradiction. We could not build a strategy for that. We could only build a truce. Kale's words hung in the warm air of the cafe. The story was out. The memory, which had lived like a cold stone in his stomach for years, was now in the space between them. He felt empty, tired. Jean and Mira were silent. The cheerful sounds of the station around them, the clink of cups, the distant announcement of a docking clearance, felt like they were coming from another universe. They had just been shown a reflection of their own species in a broken mirror, held by a stranger. Mira was the first to speak. Her voice was quiet, practical, but it wavered slightly. Kim and Lee, the two soldiers, did they get away in the chaos? Kale took a slow breath. He nodded once. Yes, the humans confirmed it later during prisoner exchanges. The blast pattern, the debris, it was calculated. The kinetic rod was precise. It destroyed the target zone, but the shockwave and debris shower were directed away from the path they had planned. They used the confusion and the storm to retreat to another emergency hatch. They were picked up hours later. He looked at his missing limb. They were luckier than some. Jean stared at his own hands, wrapped around his cooling teacup. He was thinking of Lieutenant Park, a man whose face he would never know, whose voice he had only heard through an alien story, a man who shared his heritage. The weight of that was immense. He just said good? Jean asked, barely above a whisper. He did, Cale said. It was the last thing that mattered to him. Not the enemy in front of him. Not his own death. That the children, the teachers, the ones who could not fight were safe. That was good. That was enough. Cale pushed his empty glass away. That is what ended the war. Not our defeats. Not your victories. The Concordance High Command saw the battle reports. Not just from Europa, from other places too. They saw the same patterns. Humans throwing themselves on grenades to save a single wounded comrade. Humans playing music full of static to jam sensors while they fought. Humans using primitive chemical explosives to create avalanches or floods, changing the battlefield itself. You did not fight to take our things. You fought to make us leave. And you were willing to break everything, including yourselves, to do it. He looked at them, his large, dark eyes solemn. You are a young species. You think we are advanced because we have better star drives and cleaner energy. We are old. We are careful. We have forgotten how to be that committed. How to care about something more than our own future. To see that is terrifying. To fight it is meaningless. You cannot defeat a tide. You can only wait for it to go out. Cale slowly stood up. His body ached, the old injury from that day throbbing with the memory. So we made a treaty. We gave up our police action. In return, you agreed to traffic lanes, to some trade rules. You got to keep your messy, painful, wonderful selves, because the cost of taking them was a price we finally understood we could not pay. Jean stood up quickly. Sir, Cale, thank you for telling us. Mira nodded, her eyes bright. It is a hard story to carry. Thank you for sharing its weight. Cale regarded them, these two young humans, with their kindness and their listening ears. They were the result of Lieutenant Park's good. They were the safe children grown up. The circle was so vast it was dizzying. Do not thank me, Cale said, his voice soft. Just know, the galaxy looks at you and sees a strong, tough species. That is not what you are. That is just the shell. Inside, you are a collection of fragile, powerful loves. For your families, for your homes, for your stories, for each other. You will break the universe to protect a fragile thing. That is your power. That is your terror. Never forget which one is more important. He gave them a slight, respectful nod, a gesture from his own culture. Then he turned and walked away, moving slowly through the tables toward the exit. His silhouette, missing a limb, seemed both frail and immense. Jean and Mira sat back down. They did not speak for a long time. The story sat with them, a living thing. Finally, Mira stirred. We should go. The repair update will be coming in soon. Yeah, Jean said, but he didn't move. Mira looked at him. What is it? Jean frowned, thinking. Captain Song, the human officer he mentioned. She said they couldn't know why Lieutenant Park did it. Maybe for the civilians. Maybe to complete the mission. Maybe to give Kim and Lee a chance. He looked at Mira. But Cale knew. He figured out the why. Mira waited. He did it for all of it, Jean said, the realization solidifying. Not for one reason. For every reason. For the civilians, for the mission, for his friends. And maybe also so that 7 alien soldiers would live to tell a story about human mercy to 2 strangers in a cafe years later. So that the cost would be remembered. So it would mean something. Mira absorbed this. The idea was huge. It meant that the terror Cale spoke of was also a hope. A painful, devastating hope. They finished their drinks in silence, the weight of their inheritance upon them. They were not just mechanics and logistics officers. They were the good that Lieutenant Park had died for. They were the reason. And now, they also carried the memory of the cost. As they left the cafe to return to their ship, the station seemed different. The quiet hum of peaceful commerce, the mix of species, the lack of fear, it was not normal. It was a miracle bought with a specific terrible price on a moon of ice. It was fragile, and it was worth everything. They walked a little closer together, saying nothing, understanding everything.